Hey, in our previous 2 videos, which there should be links of here, we talked about problems that players might present to you in your horror campaign. Problems that will make the campaign less fun for those players. So, in your players' interests and yours, let's keep solving these problems. And again, we're using ideas that apply mainly to horror games. They aren't so likely in a regular fantasy game. So here is a video I'd like you to watch for about 10 seconds. Remember this scene? Where the pirates or corsairs of Umbar are wiped out by the army of the dead? Well, if you've read the book version of The Lord of the Rings, none of this is seen. It happens, but you don't see it in the book. In fact, the guys who were in it then later on tell the others about it. You never see it. It's an exciting thing that happens off screen. Personally, this kind of shenanigans is one of the reasons that, for me, while I've read J.R.R. Tolkien and enjoyed him, he's not one of my favorite authors. He tends to do this kind of thing. Why am I bringing this up? Because in your role-playing game, even more important than in a book, you need to make sure that cool, exciting stuff isn't happening off screen. Every critical plot point should have your heroes involved and participating. And this is particularly a problem in a horror game. You see, in our last video, we talked about how to make the players not rush into combat all the time by making them feel like the monsters are scary. So you've done it. The monsters are scary. The players feel outmatched by the monsters. Well, one natural activity they might fall back on is to call in the authorities. In a Call of Cthulhu game, they call the police. In a D&D game, they go and talk to the king and his wizards. And the problem is that even if your monsters can defeat the police, once your players have gone to the authority, the remaining actions or decisions don't involve your heroes. And you want your heroes to be at the center of the action, not the king's wizard. The film Return of the Living Dead solved this by having the arrival of the authorities, paramedics and cops, be worse than useless.
Send the cops.
Now, some movies try to solve it by cutting you off from help, like turning off the cell phones. Look at this as an example.
Anyone getting a signal out here?
No one can get a signal up here.
I can't get a signal.
No, still no signal. There's no signal.
Not a signal?
No, nothing. 97% nationwide coverage, and we find ourselves in that 3%.
Yeah.
Nothing, dude. I got nothing.
So, to make it clear, I think this trope of making cell phones not work is really lame. It also makes the monsters seem weak and puny if they can only survive where there's no cell phone coverage. Here's a video from one of the Blind Dead movies, which I've talked about in a previous video. And here's a link to it. Now, the Blind Dead threat, I mean, they're from medieval times, they're ancient ages, but their threat in the movies is unleashed when they get to the modern world. They're a horrifying, destructive force, and it's for our own safety that they're locked away in distant places. But here's the thing, you see. This is also true of Lovecraft's monsters. They are locked away in hidden places, not for them, but to protect us. R'lyeh is sunk under the sea where we can't find it, because if we had found it, it would have destroyed the world. Yog-Sothoth is cut off from our dimension. He's ever seeking to arrive. That means that in a modern Call of Cthulhu game, your cell phone isn't a protection. It's a threat.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
If you bring the authorities to the monsters, it could liberate the monsters. There are things man is not meant to know. And this means your heroes need to keep the monsters secret. So you have to make this clear to the heroes, to the players. There's several ways to do this. First technique is the cautionary tale. In Dusk Till Dawn, you find out that, in fact, the horrible vampires have been around for a long time. During the player's investigation, the players can find out that this horror appeared at some previous date. Perhaps ancient times, maybe it's come several times, and that it was hideously destructive. This might discourage them from letting the authorities know about it. Another possibility is you could have unreliable authorities that the players can't turn to. Now, the movie The Satanic Rites of Dracula opens with a cop turning for help to some people who are basically player characters. Why did he do this? Why doesn't he get the cops to investigate? Well, because his job is in watching a spooky old house where bad things happen, and he saw his own police chief go inside. So he knows he can't trust the police. I've used this opening a lot. As soon as the PCs know that the local authorities, the local lord, the police, whoever are in on the evil, they don't know how high the rock goes. They're stuck. They have to solve it themselves because the authorities, at least some of them, are in on it and they know it. Third way you can do it is you can set it somewhere where the players are off by themselves. Like in the ruins, they're in the middle of the jungle. In the movie The Flesh Eaters from the 50s, they're trapped on a desert island. The players are stuck and they must solve the problems themselves. Of course, you have the problem of getting the players there, but that's not too hard to handle. Now, I would combine this with the idea that the horror can't be released, so the players aren't just worried about escape attempts. For example, in the ruins, people who are not the players, the main characters, who are trying to keep the killer flower from spreading because they know it'll destroy the world. That's why they are keeping the players there, the heroes there. In the Flesh Eaters, the same problem is the Nazi scientists who made the evil flesh-eating bacteria, you don't want them to get loose again. So you're trying to keep them from getting away. You're stuck there, you can't leave, and you can't let the monsters leave. Now let's go for a movie that uses all three ideas. John Carpenter's The Thing. First off, we have a monster that is hideously destructive, and they show us that it already wiped out the Norwegian camp. So you know it's bad. Second, the authorities are unreliable. Not that they have a lot of authorities, but they have some in their group, but they know that any one of them could be infected. They can't trust anyone. Third, they're in the middle of nowhere in the Antarctic. All three of my concepts are in use here to make the players concerned about the monsters, and these ideas work just as well in a role-playing game as a movie. So here in this series, we've covered three different problems you might have. Players whose characters I think are reluctant to get involved, players who result to combat too inappropriately, and players that are trying to call in the authorities. I think these techniques will give you some tips. You can come up with some on your own, possibly better than these, and happy gaming.